100 million people have died as a result of one man's actions. Why is it that you don't know who I'm talking about? It's fascinating that American history leaves out stories like this when it's why we learn history in the first place. A survey conducted in September of 2022 asked the question, why is learning history important? All participants answered in a similar way: to recognize the flaws of our past and to correct them. Yet more and more frequently, history is used as a medium through which to idolize men for their actions, rather than to explore our collective failures. It is nice to be able to look back at an era before our time and escape to an idealistic, luxurious past, but the fact is that this creates an unhelpful, regressive view of history. Our outlook on history is as easy as it is flawed, but that does not mean that it has to be. Plenty of interesting stories are thrown out because they poke holes in our current idealized society or complicate our view of the people we view as above us. Let's not stray away from the complicated, the messy, and the uncomfortable side of history. The life and the legacy of Thomas Midgley Junior is one such example of history, a story you're not supposed to hear, and one you hopefully won't forget. Born in the late 1800s, Thomas Midgley is your average man. He lived in a quaint house with his wife where he would read poetry and listen to music in between chemical experiments. He was an environmentalist, one of the first prominent ones since the Second Industrial Revolution. This is the man responsible for 100 million deaths. He didn't make nuclear bombs. He wasn't the architect of some form of biological warfare. He made two barely noticeable inventions: the oil in your car and the gas in your refrigerator. The first crankless car engines were horribly loud because the pressurized gas chambers put too much pressure on the gas, which would lead to tiny ear-rupturing explosions. This would also damage the longevity of the engine and cause malfunctions within the car. But these cars were twice as fast as any before, so these engines could not simply be done away with. Enter Thomas Midgley, who was charged with the creation of a less combustible, equally efficient fuel source. He would lock himself in his office for hours on end to no avail for months. He understood how compounds interacted, but resources were scarce, and his project wasn't taken seriously. When he finally made the perfect solution after getting all the chemicals he needed, his compound was deemed too expensive, and he had to start over. He came up with another solution, but this time it was too smelly, and he knew it would never sell. Chemistry had combined with corporate interest in Midgley's mind. The once pure art he had mastered had been warped by the needs of the automotive industry, and his environmentalism had been done away with. He started to think the way his funders wanted him to, and sadly, this put more emphasis on profit than human life. Lead kills. We've known this for centuries, and had known this for centuries in Midgley's time. As far as we know, there is no safe exposure to lead, and lead poisoning leaves millions dead yearly. Lead mimics the calcium in our bloodstream, so it's almost impossible to filter out, and the longer it's in our bloodstream, the more clogged our arteries get. Lead is deadly and evil and sneaky, and most of all cheap, which is exactly what Midgley needed. His compound, triethyl lead, was an immediate success. This one product gave him enough bargaining power to combine 3 of the leading car companies into one. The ethyl company was Midgley's creation, and its marketing was genius. Even the name ethyl was a sneaky way of neglecting to mention the lead present in their product. From an outside glance, ethyl did seem safer. No explosions, no difficult cranks. However, people did start dying. In a factory for triethyl lead, there were dozens of hospitalizations and 5 deaths. Thomas Midgley needed to put out this fire, and he knew exactly how to do it. Since his invention of ethyl, Thomas Midgley rose through the corporate ranks and would have gotten even more powerful if he hadn't fallen ill to lead poisoning. As expected, working with the substance had a detrimental impact on his health, and he was on the brink of death. But he came back. He recovered from his lead poisoning and immediately used his charisma to become the face of his company. However, with this new position, he was charged with squashing the rumors of the dangers of lead that he of all people knew to be true. He held a press conference where he claimed that his triethyl lead was safe. To prove this, he poured the lead all over his hands and inhaled the toxic fumes for a whole minute in front of everyone.
I could do this every day for the rest of my life and have 0 ill effects,
Midgley claimed. This PR stunt succeeded. Sales for his company skyrocketed, and his status as a genius chemist was reclaimed. Going off of his previous success, General Motors, a company which at that time was part of the Ethel Company, hired him to solve the problem with refrigerators. The gas used in refrigerators was either toxic or, counterintuitively, flammable, and Midgley was tasked with finding an alternative. Midgley obliged, and 3 days later came back with his solution, Freon. It worked perfectly and could be implemented in a variety of ways in a plethora of products. This ended up being Midgley's second deadly invention, as it ripped a hole in the ozone layer, which has contributed to an uncontrolled increase in air pollution and millions of excess deaths from skin cancer. This serves to show Midgley really was an excellent chemist who had the potential to do great things for our world. If only our culture wasn't so focused on wealth and power, Midgley could have had one of the best impacts on our world, rather than one of the worst. He revolutionized the automobile. He had the capacity to fix carbon emissions early. He had an aptitude for detoxifying harmful chemicals. But his legacy is for doing the opposite. Corporate consciousness is an oxymoron, and Midgley's story proves that. Thomas Midgley Jr. was a household name in his time, and was idolized for his contributions to technological advancements. However, the second his story became the story of yet another greedy corporate entity ignoring safety hazards and the environment, his name was cut out of history books to make it easier for our corporate overlords to continue their harmful practices right now. Let's not forget the toll that corporate ignorance has on our planet and our daily lives. Let's not forget Thomas Midgley Jr.